Are we live?
We're live.
We are live.
We're live. We'll begin in a few minutes, folks. Just to let everybody tune in,
Volume,
etc.
check that we are working.
And I think we can begin, can't we, Rob?
Yes.
So,
okay.
welcome to week 4.
Week 4.
The final week of the MOOC, and we're actually live from Southampton. So as usual, it's Rob and myself, Mary, and we're here to answer your questions, to make some comments in response to the comments and responses you've made during the week, and in fact during the whole course. And we do have some real questions that have been submitted either on the MOOC itself or via the Facebook page. So I'll hand over first to Rob to make a few comments on what he would like to say about the course in general and his experience of this particular MOOC, and then I'll chip in with my thoughts.
Okay, wonderful.
Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mary. And yes, so just to begin with, I'd like to say that if you are watching live, you can see comment boxes on the right-hand side of the screen.
It's confusing.
When I do that, it will look like the left, but it's the right. So we welcome your questions or input as we go through.
Yeah.
Some people are
I'm sorry
joining
if
us.
we're messing around
Yes.
with bits and technology. It's a bit difficult to kind of keep an eye on everything, isn't it?
It is, yes.
So
And we
sorry
said that,
about that.
yes, we said that one key part of the future of kind of internationalization and global education will be technology. And we have to think about how to deliver. And one very interesting thing is when you're teaching, sometimes you're looking at the screen in front of you, but you should be looking at the camera.
Yes.
And we mentioned eye contact, and there are a lot of studies about how it can be very ineffective when you're trying to teach online and you're not giving eye contact to the person because they don't respond very positively. So we're just going to apologize and say we will lose eye contact constantly.
We will.
I have my notebook.
Yeah.
I have my laptop, and we have a screen in front of us. So we're looking.
I've got an iPad. Yeah. I've got my phone. I've got my notes. I've got Rob. So it's a bit difficult to manage everything, isn't it?
But we're communicating about our difficulties, which should make everything better. But yeah. So one thing, I think an observation for week 4 and for the course in general. So I just wanted to say how interesting it is that our goal in creating this MOOC the way we did was to get people sort of networking, talking and sharing experiences, and to draw focus on what you do and what you already know in a very similar way to the way that we would teach students in front of us, especially in an academic setting. We don't treat them like they are empty and we are going to fill them with our knowledge. We get them to reflect on what they already know and how they can expand on that with new knowledge. And I think that's worked really well. And I'd just like to say that when people have been discussing behavior, how they teach, how they engage with other people, lots of people have said, we don't, maybe we didn't know this term, or we didn't think about it like this. And it's very interesting, like fronting, for example.
Yes,
fronting.
That's a good example.
That's a good example. Yeah, that was fronting.
Yeah.
So like things like that might be things that people already do subconsciously. So we're not saying change your behavior, but notice what you do and create an environment where these things are encouraged and these things are kind of recommendations.
Yes.
And you can enhance these kind of skills, but ones that already exist. And as teachers, we also notice that different people are discussing different ways of managing groups, depending on who the group are. And that's really important for teaching, is that there isn't one way to do this. I was going to be metaphorical, but there isn't one way to achieve our goals, because again, how you manage effectively depends on whom you manage, and how you and what.
We're going to be talking about grammar later.
And depending on which discipline you're in, we see some people who are in the arts, for example, saying, "Oh, this is a great project I do with my students. They can get to know each other and like make a video about an arts project." And that's great for some subjects and it works really well. And other people are saying, they do other activities that are related to their disciplines. and also their personalities. Because we'll mention Eleanor lately, who posted a few questions, but she was also giving me a commentary on Facebook Messenger, saying, "Oh, I've just finished my class, and I was trying to apply some of the methods we talked about, and she felt she really helped one student to gain in confidence, to engage in the group, and to understand the expectation." And she thought it was really wonderful just that she reached that one student in this one class by thinking about the difficulties the student had and thinking about how her behavior might affect that. And that's what we want. And that's, again, we develop our knowledge and our expertise by doing this course and engaging with people and thinking about what we do. And I think I can see lots of evidence from the course that that's what people are doing here. They know how to teach. They know the knowledge they want to engage with. And now they're in a discussion about how they can best do that. And I think that's what we wanted. That's the wonderful thing. So those were my thoughts for the week, for the 4 weeks.
That's lovely.
What about you, Mary?
Yeah, I'd just like to pick up on something that Rob said about, for example, Elena, who found success helping one student. And it is by those small steps that we progress ourselves as teachers and as learners. And we can't expect to be the perfect teacher for everybody in our class, can we? We will only ever probably touch a certain number significantly in their learning. And other people we won't perhaps click with as easily. So I think we want to be perfect, don't we? We want to be perfect teachers, and we want to teach everybody in our class, and we want everybody to come away with this sort of like 100% knowledge and so on. But it's never going to happen. It's really a question of being aware of the audience and the individuals in the audience, and being open to their needs, and being open to changing ourselves, and that perception of our own strengths and weaknesses as teachers, and being willing to change and to do the best we can for the next cohort of students, because that next cohort will not be the same as the one that's just gone. And so you never seem to get that perfect experience. So Elena, to come back to Elena, who's been such a magnificent presence in this run of the MOOC, the fact that she had that success with one student is to be applauded. And Elena, hang on to that experience, because that will stand you in such great stead when perhaps another cohort you don't really get quite the same feeling, same experience, because that is unfortunately what happens with teaching.
And I was going to say, Elena has been great, but so has Erkan. Erkan's been wonderful.
Erkan has been wonderful.
Erkan is here. Hello, Erkan.
Oh, hi. Hi. Yes, I've just noticed that. It's so difficult trying to keep an eye on everything. And many apologies for that. We're not experts, really, are we, in technology?
In multitasking.
Multitasking, right, okay. So, Erkan, yes, we wanted to say a big hello to you. We also wanted to say a big hello to, I can never get your name right. Is it Faizan or Faizan? Khalid, who is training trainers now in EMI and other settings. So well done. It's great that you're part of our community, and we look forward to working with you and hearing from you in the future. Along with that, apologies to Jamie Walker, and other people who are in a similar situation to Jamie, in that you cannot access the Google Hangouts, some of the TED Talks, etc., because they're just not available in your country or where you are at the moment. There's nothing we can do about that. Obviously, you know that. Certainly for something like today's Google Hangout, there will be a script, so at least you could read that. For other things, probably you can't access them for the moment.
For the moment.
Because times do change, don't they, Rob?
They do indeed. I was going to say there's a script.
I hope there's a script.
Nobody told me.
I hope there's a script. So, yes, so we've got lots of people that we would love to engage with further, but technology is wonderful, but it's not doing exactly everything we would like it to do.
And also mention lots of the people who've been posting on the Facebook group who are doing lots of EMI training at the moment.
Yes.
Or have been doing so. And that's really wonderful to see as well.
There's Myrna. Myrna's asked a question. I don't know if it's time to move on to the questions yet.
Let's have a question.
But she's here on the Facebook group. In your opinion, to what extent is grammar and punctuation important for EMI academics? And as we've just said, Myrna is now coaching EMI teachers and professionals. So that's absolutely wonderful that our community is growing. And from this MOOC, people are able to take whatever experiences they've gained and then train other people. So it's just lovely to think of this MOOC and this group, this community as being a sort of hub from which other people can spin off courses and support for other academics. Anyway, to get back to Mona's question, the teachers that she's coaching at the moment, surprisingly, these teachers are more interested in learning the basis of grammar and punctuation than in teaching strategies or pedagogy. They want to feel more confident when reviewing their students' written work. Now, we haven't really talked about this, have we?
Not
so
a lot.
Maybe
No.
this is the moment to
yes.
just move into written support. Have you any thoughts, Rob?
I do. I think it's, and she mentioned there about confidence, and I think often people who are not confident about their language will want not always what's best for them, but they want the symbolic, should we say, symbolic power, or the idea that they can show that they're able to use the language. They feel they have a weakness with the language. And even if you say, let's focus on communication, or let's focus on delivery, or you can do things in the classroom that don't even require you to be speaking at that time, still they will feel that lack of confidence, and they will feel everything would be better if they could improve their grammar, punctuation, and probably my guess is, because I've seen it in other contexts, particularly in East Asia, you see some students come to EMI courses with the expectation that their grammar and punctuation will get feedback, will be commented on, and they will improve it by doing the EMI course. And teaching in England, we teach at the University of Southampton, and students lose that idea very quickly that they're ever going to get feedback on their language from a content module. And yes, I think, even home students don't write in any stretch of the imagination. They don't write perfectly with accurate sentence, certainly not accurate punctuation. But again, you have to focus on message. We're not here to mark their language. We're here to feedback on what they have to say and how critical their thinking is, how good they are at their subject, which language is part of. But I think we can be more confident because students don't have that expectation. But some of you work in contexts where the students expect feedback.
Yes.
And they expect, if they're writing in English, that their English writing would improve because they are taught and corrected in English. And that's a real challenging situation to be in if you don't feel confident correcting people's English. And most people's job, most people who work in EMI, that's not their background. They're not language teachers. So it's very challenging. And I think sometimes you do need to improve some aspects of your knowledge of grammar and of punctuation in order to feel more confident. while at the same time trying to adjust students' expectations and say, you do improve by reading, you do
Yes.
improve
Yeah.
by communicating, and me teaching you grammar and correcting your grammar is not going to get either of us very far.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So
No.
I don't know. What did you think, Mary?
Well, it reminds me of that sort of ideal situation where perhaps working alongside of the EMI teacher who is delivering the content, you also do have a language teacher. And of course, this is not something that can happen very often, because two teachers sort of dedicated to one group or cohort of students, it's probably not going to happen very often. But if you can make it clear that you deliver the content and you're not going to give them feedback on their language, and if there were another person available, such as a English language teacher who could work alongside you to give students support that they might need, that is a way around it. I don't think it happens very often, but it could be something that might work out in some environments. But I mean, all you can do is make the message clear that you are a teacher of content, that you are an EMI teacher, and that your aim is to deliver the content and to communicate successfully and to make knowledge happen. That you're not there to teach the vehicle through which it's delivered.
Yeah, and actually one interesting point that's coming in now, because we're looking to build skills and build sort of competencies for the future. But the future, I think in the future, technology is going to really transform what we're doing.
Yes.
Translators are getting much better. Grammar checkers are getting much better. And perhaps if we have this same conversation in 5 years' time, it might be very different, because students will be submitting work and they have so much support online. The idea of somebody standing up teaching them grammar and punctuation might make you sound incredibly old. It's like, kind of like, oh, I'm a grammar teacher. People say, what? What's a grammar
teacher? Yes.
So again.
Yeah. So we can't know what's going to happen in the future, can we?
No.
I think it is a question of EMI professionals persevering, and somehow resources, whether they're resources in the form of individuals, of people, or online resources, will come together to help your mission and help you professionally. So really the message is to keep going.
Yes.
Shall we move to some of the questions? Oh, this is where I get confused. Where am I? Southampton. Okay. I put me in. Oh dear. It should come up. Yes. Okay. And this sort of like follows on from what we've just been saying. Elena's asked several questions. The one that's just popped up in front of me is, when taking FCE or CAE English language proficiency tests, one of the assessments goes to pronunciation part, which has strict rules to follow. Otherwise, the candidate gets a low mark. The test focuses on intonation, sentence, and word stress to be accurately placed. Even individual sounds are paid attention to during the exam. So basically, the question is, students have exams to pass in which they have to adhere to certain rules. And yet we're, emphasizing the message that it is communication that matters rather than grammatical accuracy and so on. What's your reaction to this?
Yes, well, my reaction is, so my personal view is that these scales of measuring language will change eventually. At the moment, to be quite controversial, I would say they're quite discriminatory.
Yeah.
Because we talked about stress-timed and syllable-timed languages, and some of those languages are marked down a lot more heavily. If you have a French accent, you can pass a speaking test much more easily than if you have a Chinese accent because of this intonation, timing, and the way they describe your proficiency in speaking. I don't think it will last long, because I do think it's a form of discrimination. And the more people we hear with Chinese accents, with Japanese accents, people now here are very familiar, I think because of football and Hollywood and things like that. People are very familiar with Italians who become superstars in England,
Yes,
and
that's
people
true.
are familiar with how they speak, and they don't think that it's not an error. They don't have bad pronunciation, they are just Italian. And that familiarity will grow, especially, I think, the rise of China, the number of Chinese students who come here, the number of Chinese tourists who come here, the films we watch that come from East Asia, the exposure is much more now than it used to be. So I think on one hand, these scales will change and they will focus more on communication.
I agree totally with you.
Yeah. But on the other hand,
he won't let me interrupt.
No. The other hand, we are in a difficult position, and if you have to pass the test saying, "Oh, in 10 years' time it will be completely different," is not going to get you an A.
No, it's not. No.
Yeah.
And you
No.
do have. Oh, thank you. No, I've forgotten what I was going to say. No, what I was going to say was that if there is an exam to be passed, then it's your job as a teacher to help students to pass it. And whatever you have to do to pass the test or the exam, you just do it, don't you? And Rob is right that things will change. It's just that exam boards and people that set exams tend to be the most conservative of people, don't they?
They do.
And so it will change. And there are signs already that with some of the big exam boards, that criteria by which students are assessed or have been assessed in the past, they are changing a little bit, but it's a very slow process. And at the moment, all we can do is do what is necessary to succeed, even if we know that, in fact, what we produce for the exam might not be the case.
For example,
Yes,
I think IELTS have a lot of pressure. They have something in their descriptors. I think it's for the writing descriptor that says only makes the kind of errors that native speakers would make.
Yes.
And they get a lot of pressure now because of that. More and more people are aware of their criteria. They post it online, and they do get a lot of criticism, because why is a British person making an error okay, but somebody from another country who makes a different kind of error because of their background, it's not okay.
Yes.
And again, there is a lot of, and again, lots of people are conservative, so they might move it just no errors allowed. But I think at some point, the notion of error will have to become functional. So does it affect the communication, and not superficially, is there an error that I think is an error?
I was talking a while back with some international students, and there is this use of should have, would have, could have nowadays, which, as you know, is written should have, could have, must have, etc. But many young people today, particularly when they're texting, will write should have, very often of, or something like that. And it's now creeping into academic writing, that for some British people whose work we mark at the university, for them should of is okay. And yet if an international student were to write that, it would be penalised. So it's a vast area to clarify with students, and it's difficult to get your head round, because it is to do with language change and people's perceptions and so on. So that immediately came into my mind as being a really big area for discussion. an example of how the language is changing and how people react to, somebody writing should, of, of.
Yeah, and also the background, because lots of people now who lecture at universities and who are English teachers, who are, say, over the age of 50.
Careful.
Lots of them, sorry, but lots of them had a different education when they were young, and they were taught very specifically what were errors and non-errors.
Yes. Yeah.
I was educated in an era where it was much freer, and the classroom was all about communication, and our English classes were about literature and communication, and we weren't taught what verbs were. We
Good
weren't.
Lord.
I know. That's why I'm so terrible at English. But things like, actually, I was going to refer to Myrna's question, because she asked the question, how important is grammar and punctuation for da, 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 da. And the is, so it's like, how important are grammar and punctuation? But that's the most common, that's very common now in English for young people to say that, oh, there is a chair and table in the room.
Yes.
And
that there is many things, like there is fixed, isn't it?
It's become
it's a fixed phrase.
Yeah. So things like that. Now, younger people don't notice it when you say that. Or like, Mary and me are going to the park. Lots of people don't even notice. If you said, oh, that's an error, they'd say, well, what are you talking about?
No, definitely not. The other thing that to do with punctuation, actually, Myrna, there are rules about punctuation. They have simplified greatly since I was at school, when I was taught the rules of punctuation. And now, because of texting, I think some people see I can't say the word punctuation as sort of decoration, almost as visual, pretty things to put in your whatever written text you're trying to write or to communicate through. The actual meaning of a semicolon or whatever it is has been lost. So once again, punctuation is simplifying down and becoming easier for people to use. And although I, being terribly old-fashioned, use punctuation in a meaningful way, I have to accept the fact that other people don't have the same view as myself.
Yes, and that goes back and it relates to another question that we've had, but the point that there's no such thing as correct language in communication.
No.
So if you use particular words and other people do not perceive a mistake, in communication there is not a mistake. It doesn't exist there because language is not fixed.
It's not.
So again, we're talking about Britain and the amount of diversity just among British people who come to study here. If you put that out to the globe, then you might focus really strongly on correct language, correct pronunciation, and you might be in an audience of people who can't even perceive whether it's correct or not. No, it might even sound incorrect. No. So yeah, sorry, we have a comment. Yes.
Could you read that? Because even with my glasses, I can't quite see.
You would like my young eyes, would you, Mary? Well, 1 year older. Yes. So we've got, in my view, we should move far away from the classroom environment because our final goal and the main purpose of EMI on the whole is to prepare younger and next generations to work in a global environment where more and different English languages are spoken, as well as different pronunciations and so on, and these will coexist in the same workplace. It's quite controversial because some still have an old-fashioned attitude towards British English language that fits with some particular interests as regard to language politics as well. And it's a wonderful stream of consciousness. Thank you very much. No, I like that. Yes, and I agree. And I think, there are lots of opportunities in modern higher education to do more than the kind of classroom focused activities that we had to do in the past due to a lack of resources, a lack of integration between education and work, for example. Now we can integrate a lot of experiences into education. Lots more programs have sort of times when you can study in other countries or take work placements and have real experiences. I teach an intercultural communication module, and most of the assessment is based on on students' real life experiences. So we do theory with a bit of reading and in class, but then I send them away and they have an online activity where they're sharing their experiences of, for example, going to a public space and looking at how people respond to a symbol differently, things like this. And it's really about their communication. It's really about them engaging with the world. And again, it's not something we did so much before. So yeah, I absolutely agree. And yes, the idea that somebody in, let's say, Mexico should be adhering to and valuing British English for no good reason, I think is problematic and it is old-fashioned. But we have to acknowledge these ideologies do exist. But I think we should challenge them, because Mexico is not Britain. The British Empire is gone.
No.
Did you not read about that?
I didn't know that. Okay.
It disappeared.
I think we ought to move on actually,
Okay.
because we've got questions, and there were 3 questions actually from Elena. Question number 2: as an English language teacher, I'm concerned about delivering of language input according to updated course books. Now, after taking EMI online course, I started to feel guilty about my ignorance of some linguistic processes in the frames of globalization. Thus, maybe my informations about language teaching are false. How are these language unit change regulated, and will they be included in updated grammar or course books one day? We've sort of been talking in that direction, haven't we, already, in the sense that examination boards will change, course books will change, and course books are beginning to change more swiftly. In the past, if you had a course book, then you had that edition for about 10 years. Whereas now, new editions of course books are produced far more frequently. And I think with online resources as well, then one can imagine a time when the resources available to people all over the world will be updated in many ways that we can't even begin to imagine at the moment. So will they be included in updated grammar or course books one day? The answer is yes. I don't know if there's anything else you...
Yes, they are. And I'll add Henry Widdowson, I remember. I was at a conference and
yes.
We were talking about English as a lingua franca and the potential impact on the teaching of English. And they said, will these English as a lingua franca course books exist? And he said, oh, they don't have to. A course book is not a constraint. It is a little bit, but it doesn't tell you everything you have to do in the class. You're not limited to only using a course book. And you can use a course book critically, even if it contains a reading you don't really agree with or a point that you don't really like. You can engage with it critically or ignore it and do something else, especially with we were mentioning technology and opportunities for different kinds of activities. A course book shouldn't really be leading the class entirely anyway. But yeah, I think there has been change. English language textbooks don't look the same.
No.
Lots of them do not look the same as they used to before.
No, they've changed radically.
Because if you read the teacher's book, they're not expecting the teacher to be at the front of the room teaching grammar points in the first language in a way that they might have done before the communicative turn in language teaching. Yeah, so it is changing.
It is changing.
Yeah.
Just got a message through from Mirna. Thanks for putting my question on the table. I'm watching since you started the live session, but I can't comment. Oh. And someone else is writing a comment at the moment, but it's just lovely to have this live interaction with you. It's brilliant. Thank you so much. I get so excited by these things. I have childlike excitement. Okay. We had
another question.
We had another question. I'm getting confused now.
You're too technological, Mary. I've got one that's come up here.
Oh, what's that?
So yes.
What about?
I'm noticing that I was correcting grammar while reading. But I do that, yeah. I tend to paraphrase when I read. I read it, even if I have a quotation behind me from a scholar, I'll tend to read it in my own voice anyway,
Okay.
and I change the words and confuse people. But there's another question. What about the impact that EMI is having on pedagogy on the whole? And should this interest EMI researchers? And yes, I think more generally, the internationalization and diversity in the classroom is having a huge impact on education, as well as having more people involved in discussions of what good teaching is and how you get qualified as an educator. I think this is all having an impact on education, but I would be careful about sort of treating EMI as one thing. We had some people commenting saying, what strategies are there for EMI teaching? What methods are there for EMI teaching? And I'd just be careful that we can't necessarily predict the exact kind of classroom we're talking about. Again, there will be variations. Some of you are teaching in situations where lots of your students don't really understand a lot of what you're saying. And some other people are teaching in situations where there are, it's a high level of student, and essentially you're just having to consider how you can be a little bit clearer when you're delivering your content and how you can get people engaged. But again, there's a wide range of contexts. So just be careful of treating EMI as one thing. And lots of scholars do this, lots of EMI researchers at the moment are looking for single answers, because you can write a book on that very easily. We had a conversation before about writing a course book for EMI, and we were both very skeptical about the idea of telling everybody how to teach. And the only real variable for all those contexts is English is the medium. And again, for us, we have access to technology. The students who enter the University of Southampton have to have a certain level of English as measured by IELTS to even get a visa to study here. Not everybody's in that situation. So I wouldn't write that book, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend treating EMI as one thing. I think we have to go very contextual, talk about the students who are there, talk about the tools that you have and the resources that are available and what you're trying to teach. Because often English is part of the competence that people want. A university introduces EMI thinking our graduates need English because it's the global language, so it's not to be ignored. And yeah, you can't predict what people need. So although this is English as a medium for academics MOOC, bringing lots of people together into a conversation, we don't want that conversation to be superficially large. Because if you just say EMI is like this, you don't get people's actual stories, and you don't get what people are really trying to do with their groups. So I think that's a really important distinction.
Yeah. Have we covered most of the questions now?
I think we had one more from Eleanor, didn't we?
We did.
Question
I'm trying
one.
to.
I think it was that I remember it.
Oh, you do?
It was, is there a difference, I'm paraphrasing again, is there a difference between people who are, for example, teaching chemistry?
Oh, yes, that was it.
Is that kind of EMI only about communication? Whereas somebody who's teaching English through EMI, is that going to be about language, grammar, and other elements as much as it is about communication? And yes, I've been talking away, but
I think we've kind of covered this in a way, because for us there's such separate experiences, aren't they? Separate environments that I can see quite a distinction between the two, but I do appreciate that other people's experiences are far more blurred. They're not as clear cut, and I can really only echo what Rob has said about tuning into the needs of your audience and doing the very best for them by talking about their needs, by evaluating, their abilities in the language, because that has to have an impact on the way you teach. You have to find the right mode of delivery, the right words, in order to reach those people. So it would be totally, if I can imagine going into a group of students from different countries who had a very, very high level of English, and I would just almost teach without thinking. But other groups, I would very carefully have to plan and choose my materials and moderate my delivery. So it's almost an impossible answer to give because of the huge variety of situations that you can find yourself in. And it's really just trying to make things clear at the beginning, so that people's aspirations and hopes are addressed, and their expectations are addressed, and you try and tap into the sorts of emotions that are going on with this particular group, and identify your own feelings, being honest with yourself about how you actually feel working with this group of people who have been entrusted to you.
And I'd just add that one feature of modern higher education is that it is never about knowledge only. And if you're teaching English, if somebody leaves Southampton as a Spanish graduate, they would never say, oh, my vocabulary and my grammar is excellent, but I'm terrible at communication. The university would be ashamed to have somebody as a graduate or a first level graduate who can't communicate in Spanish. And in the same way in chemistry, that's not somebody who knows their periodic table. You're not just putting chemistry knowledge into their head. So the language student needs vocabulary, needs awareness of grammar, needs awareness of various aspects of language, but they need to be able to use it, and they need to be able to engage and activate that knowledge the same way it's not exactly the same way, but in a similar way to the way that somebody who's doing medicine has to think critically about what they know and make certain decisions at certain times. And somebody who's a chemist has to make judgments about what it is that they're doing and how they do it. So it's actually all fields in higher education are critical fields, and they involve application of knowledge. They're not just about knowledge. So it's never only about the topic, but it's never only about the language either. So but you have to make your judgment.
I was thinking about people who, for example, come to the university and study history. Well, not that many graduates of history actually become historians or history teachers. It's the other skills that they have, the problem solving skills, interpretation, ability to work with other people, all. So I would put the ability to communicate through English along with that group of skills rather than the knowledge of history. So I'm sure I'm really talking wildly now off the top of my head, but I feel that if we were to look at a cohort of history graduates and then see how many actually became history teachers or historians or something related, really closely related to history knowledge, I reckon there would be it would be a small number, but they would be employed for their other skills.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would put that ability to communicate through English in that basket rather than the history knowledge basket.
Yes, absolutely. We have a question from Erkan.
Oh, do we?
Who's been sitting silently in the background. I still
can't see very well.
Okay,
let me try and read it. Oh no, I can't read it. You'll have to read it to me.
A common concern among my colleagues who have started EMI is to engage in spontaneous communication in their lectures, such as answering questions or when asked to elaborate what they have been presenting. As they are not very fluent in English, in spoken conversational skills in particular, what advice could we give them regarding such cases? Good question.
It's a very good question, and it's the scary bit, isn't it? You can prepare and prepare, and then there's the stuff that's sort of out of your control. What happens? Someone asks a question and you're not really confident enough. Is that word confident again, isn't it?
It's
confident enough to deal with it at that moment. I think we have to have certain strategies, which one of them is honesty, thinking, I need a little bit more time to respond to your question. Is it okay if we talk about that later, or in next week's class or something? The other thing would be involving the other students, so reflecting that question onto the other people in the class, I think is what I would do in that situation. If I didn't feel happy enough in myself to deal with it, because there would be somebody surely in the class who would be able to step in at that moment and ease the situation. I don't know, have you got any ideas, Paul?
My first thought was kind of using micro strategies, if you like. So things that you pick up naturally, to go back to what we talked about at the beginning. Some things you might do normally when people talk to you, but in a second language, it might seem more difficult to do it. But for example, something like sending it back to the audience through humor or something. Say, oh, was I not clear when I said that? Oh, I'm very sorry. Did everyone understand that? Did everybody not understand? Did anyone understand it? Could you explain it better than I did? Because I clearly failed. You know, something like that, as kind of using humor to get people involved, can be one thing. And I also thought one thing that I do if I panic and I need some quick thinking time, is I go for my board pen and then I'll write on the board maybe that answer. So they said, oh, what did you mean by phenomenology, for example, might be a question that I get. And then I'll think, okay, this is a term that I know I'm terrible at explaining without examples. So what I'll do is I'll go to the board and maybe start drawing something to emphasize perception can be different. Or I think of 3 words that will help me to describe it. And then that helps guide my answer. So I make sure I'm not just worried and talking, because the trouble is, again, you can't be fluent if you don't have any content.
Yes.
If you can't think of what you're going to say, then you definitely can't think of how you're going to say it. So I think you need to be calm in that situation and develop these micro strategies to give yourself the time to think about the content and then think about the delivery, because it's very difficult if you lack experience of communicating spontaneously. It's so hard to do to be spontaneous and just to start thinking of what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it at the same time. It becomes
spontaneously getting other words to express what you've said.
And we've all had that in another language where you just crash.
Yes, you do.
You just,
yes, it does.
I've got nothing to say.
So what you have to do is give yourself some space, some thinking space, which could be by humour, by reflecting back onto the class and asking for their participation, their help, turning to the board. Now, perhaps we can think of a few more answers, and we could put them up on what?
I'll tell you what we could do.
What?
We could throw the question back to our participants and say, which do you think are the best strategies for Erkan's colleagues overcoming this problem?
Because we don't know everything.
See,
I think the best thing is playing for time.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just playing for time, but playing for that calm moment.
Yes.
When you have time to think.
Yeah.
Because taking longer doesn't always mean that you're thinking. So yeah, that's the important thing as well.
I mean, even the words, oh, just give me a moment to think, can be enough for the brain cells to get into action. And you do, surprisingly, from somewhere within you, you get that strength, you get that new perspective, new knowledge,
Yeah.
new way of thinking, because our brains are marvelous things, and sometimes when pushed, we can perform, we can find the words that we need.
And there's also the avoidance strategy as well. If you hate spontaneous speech and you fear questions, have a question box. Every student has a piece of paper. Anything they didn't understand, they put on the question, they put in the question box, and then you could post a video online to answer those questions when you have time to plan, or you come back to it in the next class.
Yeah.
Or you give these questions to other students who have to come back and answer them in the seminar.
Yeah.
How's
Good
that?
idea,
See?
Rob.
Avoidance.
Avoidance.
I'm very good at avoiding work. It's good.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Are we sort of
That's
coming
like
to
the
the end
Japanese
here?
phrase.
Is it what?
I don't know if it's very Japanese, but
What's that?
I was told as a compliment, in a Japanese company, they go to the lazy person first because they'll find the fastest solution to the problem. And that's what somebody said when they came to me. Yeah, so it's
We've got. I can see the name Elena.
Yes.
Thank
What's
you
she
for
saying?
helpful. I can read it. Thank you for helpful responses.
What does the
bless.
one above say?
Nice. Right. Okay. We have to tell the truth now. He thinks that I've forgotten. Right. And I haven't. As well as today being the end of our course, it is also Rob's birthday.
Oh, I thought you'd forgotten.
And he thought I'd forgotten. Excuse me one moment to talk to the camera.
Okay. Do I have to sing myself happy birthday? And thank you, Eleanor. That's lovely.
Happy birthday,
Oh.
Rob.
I have a cake.
He has a cake. All right.
Oh,
that's
a wonderful avoidance strategy. You're going to avoid me saying anything else now. I'm going to enjoy my cake.
Okay, we have been talking for about 50 minutes, which is longer than we planned, and I should imagine lots of people have given up by now. But if you are still with us, can we just remind you of a few things? First of all, the MOOC will run again next year. I'm not sure when, but maybe something like March, Easter time, but we'll be in touch with news of that. So please encourage your colleagues and friends to join us. And if you can, publicize if you have any newsletters, any networks that you're members of, if you could participate and tell them about the MOOC, we'd be really grateful. Remember, we have the Facebook group of the same name as the MOOC. We know that Facebook doesn't work in every country and that not everybody likes Facebook, but it is something to keep some of us together, and we are working on other ideas for keeping our community together. And
I was going to say, if you can't access Facebook, you could always contact us by email, and then we can circulate to the community in general.
Yes.
Any news you have, or anything interesting happening, or feedback on some ideas that you've had after the MOOC, which it's really interesting when we hear things.
Yeah, please keep
people.
in touch. Your news will be really very, very welcome.
Yeah.
Oh, I saw that flicker. Happy birthday. Oh, and Elena's sent some
cakes.
Some cakes. Okay. Well, I'm getting hungry, I don't know, and I think we're going to ask Mimi for another cup of tea.
Okay. And there's one final good idea, by the way. Get students to look on the internet while talking.
Yeah.
And it's linking back to technology.
Often
Often you're not really needed.
No.
You're needed to draw people's focus in, and they can find the answers now.
Yes.
I'm sure the internet can explain it better than you can. So that's a really good idea.
But internet can't provide cake.
No. Unfortunately, otherwise I would share it with you. But
we're
it's online.
Virtually sharing.
Yes.
There is kind of a number there. I don't know if you can actually see it, but we are virtually sharing a cake with you. So anything else to say? Apart
Thank
from
you for my
goodbye.
cake and
All right.
and goodbye.
Keep
Yes,
in
we will.
touch. Thank you so much for participating.
Yes, you've been brilliant.
It's been
really,
wonderful.
really brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you. See you soon. Bye
Yeah,
bye.
thank you. Bye bye. Oh, we have to end it.
Have to end the
But
stream.
you do the wave, and I'll click the button. Bye bye.